The Coalition fleet hung in space like wounded animals. Admiral Vexmol stood in his own brig, watching through the small window as human criminals walked freely through his ship. His 4 red eyes burned with rage and humiliation. Colonel Danny Clark sat across from him, cleaning his fingernails with a combat knife. You know, Admiral, you could have just given us our man. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. You cannot hold this fleet forever, Vexmol snarled. The Coalition has thousands of ships. They will come for us. Danny smiled coldly. Let them come. We're just getting started. The truth was, the criminals were having the time of their lives. For years they had been locked in cells, told they were worthless, that society had no place for them. Now they were using their skills to fight for something that mattered. Marcus Webb sat in the flagship's computer center, his fingers flying across multiple keyboards. The skinny hacker had been imprisoned for stealing millions of credits through illegal computer access. Now he was using those same skills to take apart the Coalition's communication network. Danny, you need to see this, Marcus called out. I've been monitoring Coalition transmissions. They're calling in reinforcements from 3 sectors, about 200 ships heading our way. Danny walked over to look at the data. How long until they get here? 6 hours, maybe less. Good, that gives us time to send our message. On the other side of the ship, Captain Lisa Ridd was teaching Coalition prisoners how to play poker. The former pirate had stolen more ships than anyone in Earth's history before getting caught. Her red hair was tied back in a ponytail, and she wore a wicked grin. The trick, she explained to a confused Altarian guard, is knowing when to bluff. And when to fold. Politics is just poker on a bigger scale. One of her crew members, a man named Pete Santos, who had been serving time for armed robbery, came running up. Captain, we've got movement on the outer sensors. Zephyrian ships approaching? From the south. Lisa's grin widened. Looks like our bug friends want to join the party. The Zephyrian Empire had been monitoring the human attack on the Coalition fleet. They saw an opportunity to strike at their enemies while they were distracted. A force of 50 Zephyrian warships was moving toward the battle zone. Major Kelly Brooks stood in the flagship's war room, studying tactical displays. The former Marine had killed her own officers when she discovered they were selling weapons to terrorists. Now she was planning the defense of the fleet she had helped capture. Danny, we've got a problem, she said as Clark entered the room. The Zephyrians are coming from the south. Coalition reinforcements from the north. We're going to be caught in the middle. How many criminals do we have spread across the Coalition fleet? Danny asked. About 300 scattered across 12 ships. Not exactly ideal for a major battle. Danny studied the tactical display. The Coalition reinforcements would arrive first, followed by the Zephyrians. His small force would be outnumbered 50-1. You know what? Danny said finally. Let's give them a war they'll never forget. He activated the ship's communication system. This is Colonel Clark to all Earth forces. We've got company coming. Time to show these aliens what Earth's worst can do. The next few hours were chaos. The criminals worked with deadly efficiency, turning the Coalition's own weapons against them. Marcus Webb hacked into the approaching Coalition ships, causing their navigation systems to malfunction. 3 ships collided with each other before they even reached the battle zone. Lisa Reed led boarding parties to capture key Coalition vessels. Her pirates moved through the ships like shadows, taking control of engines and weapon systems. They had spent years avoiding capture by military forces. Now they were using those skills to capture military forces when the Coalition reinforcements finally arrived. They found their own ships firing on each other. The criminals had reprogrammed the targeting systems to recognize Coalition ships as enemy vessels. The fleet began destroying itself. What is happening? Demanded Admiral Kezethal, commander of the Coalition reinforcements. Why are our ships attacking each other? His communications officer looked up from her console with confusion. Sir, I'm getting reports of system failures across the fleet. Navigation, weapons, life support, everything is malfunctioning. Danny Clark's voice came over the communication system. Good evening, Admiral. Welcome to the party. Your ships are now under new management. The Zephyrian fleet arrived to find The Coalition forces in complete chaos. Their commander, General Thyktar, had been fighting the Coalition for 3 years. He had never seen anything like this. Who are these humans? He clicked to his aide. They fight like no species I have ever encountered. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. The screen showed Danny Clark's scarred face. General, I'm Colonel Clark. I believe you know one of our people, Sergeant Jake Morrison. He saved some of your civilians a few weeks ago. General Thyktar's compound eyes widened. The human medic who helped my brother's family? That's the one. The Coalition court-martialed him for showing mercy. We're here to take him home. The Zephyrian general was quiet for a long moment. What do you want from us? Help us finish this. Show the galaxy that mercy is not weakness. General Thyktar looked at the chaos around him. Coalition ships were dead in space, their crews trapped by criminal hackers and thieves. The mighty Galactic Alliance had been brought to its knees by a handful of Earth's worst criminals. You have our support? He clicked. The battle that followed was not really a battle at all. It was a demonstration. The criminals had turned the Coalition's own strength against them. Their ships were disabled, their communications cut, their weapons useless. Admiral Dexmal watched from his cell as his fleet was systematically dismantled. This is impossible, he muttered. We are the most powerful force in the galaxy. Danny? Clark appeared at his cell door. Power isn't about the size of your fleet, Admiral. It's about knowing how to use what you have. We learned that the hard way. Jake Morrison stood beside the colonel, still amazed by what he had witnessed. Colonel, why did Earth send you? Why not regular soldiers? Danny looked at the young medic with something like respect. Because regular soldiers follow rules, we don't have rules. We have nothing to lose and everything to prove. He gestured toward the disabled Coalition fleet. You showed mercy to the enemy. They tried to destroy you for it. So Earth sent its devils to remind them that mercy is not weakness, it's strength. As the Coalition fleet drifted helplessly in space, messages began arriving from across the galaxy. Other species that had been oppressed by the Coalition were rising up. The Centauri rebellion had begun attacking Coalition supply lines. The vegan Free State had declared independence. The Rigel colonies were refusing to pay tribute. Word of the human victory was spreading. A handful of criminals had defeated the most powerful military force in the galaxy. They had done it not through superior technology or numbers, but through cunning, determination, and the willingness to fight for what was right. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon was not their ships or their guns. It was their refusal to abandon their principles, even when it meant sending their worst to save their best. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted. Earth had made its choice, and the galaxy would never be the same. 3 days after the battle, Jake Morrison walked through the corridors of the captured Coalition flagship. The ship was quiet now. Most of the Coalition crew had been released to lifeboats and sent back to their homeworlds. Only the senior officers remained as prisoners. Jake found Colonel Danny Clark in the ship's observation deck, staring out at the stars. The criminal's face looked tired, older somehow. The weight of commanding a fleet of outcasts was showing. We did it, Jake said, standing beside him. You got me out. Danny nodded slowly. Yeah, we did. Question is, what happens now? Jake had been wondering the same thing. The Coalition was in chaos. Their fleet was scattered, their communications broken. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy of rebellions and uprisings. The carefully maintained order of the Galactic Alliance was falling apart. The Coalition Council wants to negotiate, Jake said. They're offering a prisoner exchange and reforms to their military justice system. Danny laughed bitterly. Reforms? They want to go back to the way things were, just with a few changes on paper. What do you want to do? Danny turned to look at Jake. You know what's funny? For the first time in my life, I actually accomplished something good. We saved you, but we also showed the galaxy that the Coalition isn't unbeatable. Other species are fighting for their freedom because of what we did. Major Kelly Brooks entered the observation deck, her boots clicking on the metal floor. Danny, we need to talk. The crew is getting restless. Some of them want to keep fighting, others want to go home. A few are talking about taking over coalition territory for themselves. Danny sighed. This was the problem with leading criminals. They were used to taking what they wanted, not following orders indefinitely. What about you, Kelly? What do you want to do? Kelly looked out at the stars. I spent 5 years in prison, thinking about the officers I killed, wondering if it was worth it. Now I know it was, but I don't want to become them. Marcus Webb's voice came over the ship's intercom. Danny, you need to get to the communication center. We've got an incoming message from Earth. The three of them made their way to the communication center. Marcus was hunched over his console, his fingers dancing across the keys. The former hacker looked up as they entered. It's from Admiral Stone herself, he said. And she doesn't sound happy. The main screen flickered to life. Admiral Patricia Stone's stern face appeared. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her blue eyes were cold as ice. Colonel Clark, what is your status? Danny stepped forward. Mission accomplished, Admiral. Morrison is safe, and the Coalition fleet is neutralized. Good, now. Bring him home. What about the Coalition? They're ready to negotiate? Admiral Stone's expression hardened. That is not your concern. Your mission was to retrieve Sergeant Morrison. Complete your mission and return to Earth immediately. Danny felt anger rising in his chest. Admiral, we've got the Coalition on the run. Other species are fighting for their freedom. We could finish this. You are criminals, Colonel. Your job is to follow orders, not make policy. The words hit Danny like a physical blow. Even after everything they had accomplished, Earth still saw them as nothing more than expendable criminals. They had risked their lives, fought impossible odds, and changed the course of galactic history. But they were still just prisoners on a leash. Jake stepped forward. Admiral, with respect, these people saved my life. They deserve better than to be thrown back in prison. Sergeant Morrison, you will return to Earth for debriefing. The criminals will be processed according to their original sentences. The communication ended. The room was silent for a long moment. Danny stared at the blank screen, his hands clenched into fists. Well, Kelly said finally, that's that, I guess. No, Jake said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. No, it's not. Jake walked to the center of the room. You saved me because I showed mercy to people who needed help. Now I'm asking you to show mercy to yourselves. Danny frowned. What do you mean? You could keep fighting. Take over coalition territory, build your own empire. But that would make you just another set of tyrants. Or you could go home and let Earth put you back in cages. But there's a third option. Jake gestured toward the view screen, which showed the nearby star system. The coalition is falling apart. There are millions of refugees, people displaced. By the war, they need help. They need medical care, food, shelter, they need mercy. Marcus looked up from his console. You're suggesting we become aid workers? I'm suggesting you become heroes, real heroes. Danny was quiet for a long time. Then he activated the ship's communication system. Attention all Earth forces. This is Colonel Clark. We've completed our mission. Sergeant Morrison is safe. Now we have a choice to make. He paused, looking around the room at the faces of the people who had followed him into battle. We can go home and pretend this never happened, or we can stay and finish what we started. Not as conquerors, but as helpers. There are people out there who need what we can give them. The responses came quickly from across the fleet. Lisa Reed was the first to speak. Count me in, Colonel. I've spent years taking from people. Time I tried giving something back. Marcus Webb nodded. I'm tired of hiding in the shadows. Maybe it's time to step into the light. One by one, the criminals made their choice. They would stay. They would help rebuild what the war had destroyed. They would find redemption not through violence, but through service. Jake smiled as he watched the transformation. These were still the same people who had been imprisoned for their crimes. But they were also something more now. They were people who had found a purpose beyond themselves. 6 months later, Jake stood in the medical center of New Haven Colony. The settlement had been built from the ruins of the Zephyrian city where he had first shown mercy. Now it was home to refugees from dozens of species. Danny Clark entered the medical center carrying supplies. The former colonel had traded his military uniform for simple work clothes. His hands were dirty from construction work, but his eyes were clearer than Jake had ever seen them. "How are our patients today?" Danny asked. Jake gestured toward the ward where former coalition soldiers worked alongside Zephyrian civilians. "All recovering from their wounds. Getting better. That young Zephyrian I helped months ago? She's training to be a medic herself." Danny nodded. "Funny how things work out." Outside, the sound of construction filled the air. Marcus Webb was leading a team to build new homes. Lisa Reed was organizing supply runs to other refugee camps. Kelly Brooks was training security forces made up of former enemies who now worked together. They had found their redemption not through forgiveness, but through action. They had chosen mercy over vengeance, compassion over conquest. And in doing so, they had become the very thing the galaxy needed most. Jake looked out at the bustling colony, where former criminals worked alongside former enemies to build something better. This was what mercy looked like when it was allowed to grow. This was what happened when people were given second chances. The war was over, but the real work of peace had just begun. And Earth's worst had become the galaxy's hope for a better tomorrow. The Coalition flagship CNS Judgment floated in the darkness of space like a massive metal city. Inside its largest courtroom, Jake Morrison sat at a metal table, his hands folded in front of him. The room was cold and sterile, designed to intimidate anyone who stood trial here. 3 judges sat behind a high bench, looking down at Jake with expressions ranging from anger to cold indifference. General Crickstar, an Altarian with 4 burning red eyes, served as the chief judge. His blue skin seemed to glow under the harsh lights. Next to him sat Prosecutor Seleth, a reptilian whose green scales reflected the light like armor. The third judge was Resonance of Truth, a crystalline being whose transparent body hummed with soft musical tones. Jake's defense attorney, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes, sat beside him. She was one of the few humans aboard the flagship. Her brown hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face showed the strain of the past week. She had been assigned to defend Jake, but they both knew her chances of success were slim. General Crickstar's voice filled the courtroom like thunder. "Sergeant Morrison, you stand accused of 3 serious charges. First, willful disobedience of direct orders. Second, waste of Coalition military resources. Third, conduct that brings shame to the Coalition uniform. How do you plead?" Jake stood up slowly. "Not guilty, sir." A ripple of clicking sounds came from the Altarian observers in the gallery. They found his plea amusing. To them, the evidence was clear. The surveillance drones had recorded everything. Prosecutor Seleth rose from her seat, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "Honored judges, the evidence against the accused is overwhelming. We have complete video records of Sergeant Morrison's actions. He deliberately ignored direct orders from his superior officer. He wasted precious medical supplies on enemy combatants. He put Coalition forces at risk by breaking formation." The prosecutor activated a holographic display in the center of the room. The images showed Jake treating the wounded Zephyrians while Colonel Vexton shouted orders at him. The footage was clear and damning. "But the most serious charge," Seleth continued, "is that his actions have emboldened the enemy. Since news of this incident spread, Zephyrian forces have increased their attacks. They believe the Coalition is weak. They believe we show mercy to those who would destroy us." She gestured to another display showing casualty reports. 17 Coalition soldiers have died in the past week. Their blood is on the hands of this human and his misguided compassion. Jake felt the weight of those words. He had not wanted anyone to die because of his choice, but he still believed he had done the right thing. Lisa Hayes stood up when it was her turn to speak. "Honored judges, my client acted according to his training and his conscience. Human medical personnel are taught to preserve life regardless of the circumstances. This is not weakness. This is strength." General Crickstar's eyes blazed brighter. Human ethical frameworks are primitive emotional responses. They have no place in military operations. The Coalition values order, discipline, and victory, not sentiment. Lisa pulled out a data pad. With respect, sir, the Coalition's own charter speaks of protecting innocent life. Article 7, Section 3 clearly states that non-combatants should be treated with dignity and provided medical care when possible. The crystalline judge hummed softly. The charter refers to Coalition civilians, not enemy populations. But these were children, Your Honor. Wounded children who pose no threat to anyone. Prosecutor Seleth hissed. The accused had no way of knowing if these civilians carried weapons or intelligence. His actions could have compromised the entire operation. Over the next 3 days, the trial continued. Witness after witness testified against Jake, Colonel. Vextan described how Jake's disobedience had disrupted the mission. Medical officers explained how the supplies Jake used could have saved Coalition soldiers instead, but Lisa Hayes also called witnesses in Jake's defense. Sergeant Carl Davis, a human soldier who had served with Jake for 2 years, testified about Jake's character. He saved more Coalition lives than anyone in our unit. He's a good man who was trying to do the right thing. Private Amy Johnson, a young human medic, spoke about Jake's training. He taught me that a medic's job is to heal, not to judge who deserves healing. He said that mercy is what separates us from the machines. The alien judges listened to these testimonies with obvious impatience. They did not understand the human concept of universal compassion. To them, mercy was a luxury that could not be afforded in wartime. On the 4th day, the prosecution presented their final evidence. Intelligence reports showed that the Zephyrian civilians Jake had helped were the family members of enemy officers. The old Zephyrian he had treated was the father of a high-ranking general. The young one was that general's child. The accused aided the family of our enemies, Seleth declared. This goes beyond simple disobedience. This borders on treason. Jake felt his heart sink. He had not known who the civilians were. He had only seen wounded people who needed help. But he realized how it looked to the court. Lisa Hayes made her final argument. My client acted out of compassion, not treachery. He saw suffering and tried to end it. In human culture, this is considered noble. We ask the court to consider that different species may have different but equally valid moral frameworks. General Crickstar's response was swift and harsh. This court operates under Coalition law, not human sentiment. The accused is guilty of all charges. The 3 judges conferred for only a few minutes before announcing their verdict. Jake was found guilty on all counts. The sentence was 25 years of hard labor in a Coalition prison colony. As the guards moved to take Jake away, Lieutenant Commander Hayes grabbed his arm. I'm sorry, she whispered. I tried my best. Jake nodded. I know. Thank you for believing in me. As he was led from the courtroom, Jake saw the faces of the human soldiers in the gallery. Some looked angry, others looked sad. A few looked proud. He hoped they understood why he had made his choice. But as the prison transport prepared to take him to the penal colony, something unexpected happened. The ship's communication system crackled to life. A new voice filled the bridge, speaking with calm authority. This is Admiral Patricia Stone of the Earth Defense Fleet. We have a message for the Coalition concerning one of our people. Jake looked up in surprise. He had never heard of the Earth Defense Fleet. As far as he knew, Earth had only a small presence in the Coalition forces. The message continued. We formally demand the immediate release of Sergeant Jake Morrison. You have 72 hours to comply. The Coalition officers on the bridge laughed. Earth was just one small planet among thousands in the Coalition. What could they possibly do to threaten the mighty Galactic Alliance? They were about to find out. The Coalition High Command gathered in the secure briefing room of the CNS Judgment. Admiral Vexmal, the Supreme Commander of Coalition forces, sat at the head of the table. His massive Altarian frame dwarfed the other officers around him. The 72-hour deadline from Earth had passed 6 hours ago, and nothing had happened. I told you there was nothing to worry about. Admiral Lexmal said, his 4 red eyes gleaming with amusement. Earth is a backwater planet with primitive technology. They have maybe 50 ships in their entire fleet. What could they possibly do to us? The other officers nodded in agreement. General Crickstar, who had presided over Jake's trial, clicked his approval. The humans are emotional creatures. They make empty threats when they are upset. We should ignore them. Commander Isketh, a reptilian intelligence officer, slithered forward. Our scouts report no unusual activity near Earth. Their small fleet remains in orbit around their home planet. They have taken no aggressive action. The meeting was interrupted by a frantic communication from the bridge. Admiral, we have an incoming transmission from an unknown fleet. They claim to be from Earth, Admiral Lexmal laughed. Put it through. Let us see what these humans want to say. The main screen flickered to life. A human face appeared, weathered and scarred. The man wore no standard uniform, just a simple black jacket with no insignia. His gray hair was cut short, and his blue eyes were cold as ice. I am Colonel Danny Clark, commanding officer of the Earth Defense Fleet Redemption Division. We are here to collect our man. The coalition officers looked at each other with confusion. This human did not look like the polite diplomats they were used to dealing with. There was something dangerous about him. Admiral Lexmal leaned forward. Colonel Clark, I am Admiral Lexmal of the Coalition High Command. Your government has no authority here. Sergeant Morrison was tried and convicted under coalition law. He will serve his sentence? Danny Clark's expression did not change. You have 10 minutes to bring Morrison to the docking bay. After that, we start taking him by force. You dare threaten us? General Crickstar snarled. We have over 300 ships in this sector. How many ships do you have? Enough, Clark replied simply. The screen went black. Admiral Lexmal turned to his officers. Scan the area. Find their fleet. The sensor operator worked frantically at his console. After several minutes, he looked up with confusion. Sir, I'm picking up only 12 ships. They're small, about the size of our destroyers. No match for our fleet. 12 ships? Admiral Lexmal stood up. They brought 12 ships to threaten us? Are these humans insane? What the coalition did not know was that Earth had been preparing for this moment for months. Ever since Jake's arrest, a secret project had been underway. The Earth government had decided to send a message to the galaxy about how they protected their own, but instead of sending their best soldiers, they had chosen a different approach. They had emptied their prisons and military detention centers. Murderers, thieves, soldiers who had been court-martialed for war crimes, pirates, and every other kind of criminal were given a choice: serve in the redemption fleet or spend the rest of their lives in prison. Colonel Danny Clark had been serving life in prison for killing 12 enemy soldiers who had already surrendered. Major Kelly Brooks, his second in command, had been convicted of murdering her own officers when she discovered they were selling weapons to terrorists. The crew of each ship was filled with men and women who had nothing left to lose. 10 minutes passed, nothing happened. Admiral Lexmal was about to order his fleet to destroy the human ships when the first reports came in. Sir, we've lost contact with the supply depot on Deck 7. The armory on Deck 12 is reporting intruders. All communication with the engine room has been cut. Admiral Lexmal's 4 eyes widened. How is that possible? We have sensors throughout the ship. The answer came from Marcus Webb, a former hacker who had been serving 20 years for breaking into military computers. He had slipped through the coalition's security systems like they were made of paper. While the admirals were talking, he had already disabled half the ship's defenses. Captain Lisa Reed, a former pirate who had stolen over 40 ships before being caught, was leading boarding parties through the coalition fleet. Her teams moved through the ships like ghosts, capturing key positions without firing a shot. The criminals knew how to fight dirty. They had spent years breaking laws and avoiding capture. Now they were using those skills against the coalition. Sir? They're in the detention center, a junior officer reported. They're freeing all the prisoners. Admiral Lexmal slammed his fist on the table. How many of them are there? We don't know, sir. They seem to be everywhere at once. The truth was there were only about 300 humans in the entire Redemption fleet, but they moved like shadows, striking quickly and vanishing before the Coalition forces could respond. They used stealth, hacking, and psychological warfare. Instead of direct confrontation, Danny Clark's voice came over the ship's communication system. "Attention, Coalition forces. We have taken control of your flagship, we have your supply lines, we have your communication systems, and we have your weapons." Admiral Vexmal tried to activate the emergency protocols, but nothing worked. The humans had cut all the important systems. "You have two choices," Clark continued. "Give us Morrison and we leave peacefully, or we start taking this fleet apart piece by piece." Major Kelly Brooks appeared on the bridge with a squad of former soldiers. They moved with practiced efficiency, their weapons trained on the Coalition officers. "Admiral, you're coming with us." As they marched Admiral Vexmal through the corridors of his own ship, he saw the extent of the human operation. His crew stood helplessly as the criminals controlled every important system. They had been outmaneuvered completely. In the detention center, Jake Morrison was freed from his cell. He looked around in amazement at the chaos. These were not the professional soldiers he was used to. These men and women had tattoos, scars, and the hard look of people who had lived rough lives. "Who are you people?" Jake asked. Danny Clark stepped forward. "We're the worst Earth has to offer, son. Murderers, thieves, and traitors, but we're here to bring you home." Jake stared at the colonel. "Why? Why would Earth send criminals to rescue me?" Clark's scarred face showed something that might have been a smile. "Because sometimes it takes bad people to do good things. And because no one messes with our own." The Coalition learned that day that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their numbers. It was their refusal to abandon each other, no matter the cost. They had sent their worst to save their best, and it had worked perfectly. Earth had made its point. They would protect their people, and they would do it in ways the galaxy had never seen before. The morning sun cast long shadows across the broken city of New Haven on planet Kepler 442. Sergeant Jake Morrison crouched behind a pile of rubble, his medical kit heavy on his back. The sounds of distant explosions echoed through the empty streets. This war had been going on for 3 years now, and Jake was tired of it. He checked his watch. The Coalition forces were supposed to move through this sector in 20 minutes. Jake's job was simple: follow the troops and patch up any wounded soldiers. He had done this hundreds of times before, but today felt different. The Zephyrian Empire had been fighting the Galactic Coalition for control of this planet. The Zephyrians looked like giant insects with 4 arms and hard shells covering their bodies. Most Coalition soldiers feared them. Jake had learned to respect them as fighters, but he still saw them as the enemy. Colonel Vextan's voice crackled through Jake's radio. The Altarian commander had a voice like grinding metal. "All units, advance through Sector 7. Eliminate any resistance, no prisoners." Jake stood up and followed the blue-skinned Altarian soldiers as they moved through the ruins. The Altarians were the leaders of the Coalition. They believed in order and discipline above all else. They had no patience for weakness or mercy. The Coalition forces moved quickly through the damaged buildings. Jake saw the destruction everywhere. Homes that once held families were now just piles of stone and metal. The smell of smoke and death filled the air. They reached the center of the old city. Here, a massive explosion had torn through what looked like a school or hospital. The building was split in half, with debris scattered across the street. Jake's trained eye spotted something that made his blood run cold. There were survivors in the wreckage. He could hear them crying out in the clicking language of the Zephyrians. Jake looked around at the Coalition soldiers. They were setting up a perimeter, ignoring the sounds from the ruins. To them, these were just enemy voices that would soon be silent. Jake moved closer to the destroyed building. Through a gap in the rubble, he could see movement. A small Zephyrian was trapped under a beam. Its shell was cracked, and green blood pooled beneath it. Next to the trapped creature, an older Zephyrian was trying to lift the beam with its 4 arms. These were not soldiers. Jake could tell by their size and the way they moved. These were civilians, maybe even children. His radio buzzed. Morrison, get back in formation. We're moving out in 5 minutes. Jake looked at the trapped Zephyrians, then at his fellow soldiers. The coalition forces were already turning to leave. They had swept the area and found no military targets. The mission was complete, but Jake could not move. He stared at the young Zephyrian under the beam. Its large compound eyes met his, and he saw something he had never expected to see in an enemy's face: fear, pain, and something else that looked almost like hope. "Morrison, now!" Colonel Vextan's voice cut through the air like a blade. Jake made his choice. He dropped his rifle and pulled out his medical kit. He ran toward the trapped civilians. Ignoring the shouts from his unit, the older Zephyrian saw him coming and made a defensive gesture with its arms. It was trying to protect the young one. Jake held up his hands to show he meant no harm. He pointed to his medical kit and then to the wounded Zephyrian. The older one hesitated, then stepped back. Jake crawled under the beam and examined the injured creature. The damage was severe. Without medical attention, it would die in minutes. Jake worked quickly. He injected pain medication and began treating the wounds. The Zephyrian's shell was harder than human skin, but the soft tissue underneath was similar to human organs. Jake had studied alien anatomy as part of his medical training. As he worked, more coalition soldiers arrived. They stood around the ruins, watching Jake with confusion and anger. Colonel Vextan pushed through the crowd, his blue face twisted with rage. "Morrison, stand down immediately. That is an enemy combatant." Jake did not look up from his work. "This is a child, sir. A wounded child. It is a Zephyrian. We do not waste medical supplies on the enemy." Jake continued his treatment. He found more wounded civilians in the wreckage. An elderly Zephyrian with a broken leg, a female with burns across her shell. He treated them all, using his own supplies and equipment. The young Zephyrian he had first helped was stable now. Its breathing was steady, and the bleeding had stopped. It looked up at Jake with what might have been gratitude. Colonel Vextan stepped closer. "Morrison, you are disobeying a direct order. Stop this immediately." Jake looked up at his commander. "Sir, these are non-combatants. They are wounded and need help. It's what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to win this war, not play nursemaid to the enemy." Jake stood up, his hands covered in green Zephyrian blood. Around him, the wounded civilians watched the exchange with fear. They could not understand the words, but they could feel the tension. "Sir, I took an oath to preserve life. All life." "Colonel." Vextan's 4 eyes narrowed. "You took an oath to follow orders. Guards, arrest Sergeant Morrison." 2 Altarian soldiers stepped forward, their weapons raised. Jake did not resist as they placed restraints on his wrists. He looked back at the wounded Zephyrians one last time. The young one he had saved was sitting up now, supported by the older one. It raised one of its 4 arms in what looked like a gesture of thanks. Jake nodded back. As the coalition forces led him away, Jake could hear the Zephyrians clicking softly to each other. He did not understand their language, but he thought he heard something like gratitude in their voices. The surveillance drones had recorded everything. By the time they reached the coalition base, Jake knew his military career was over. He had chosen mercy over orders, and the coalition would not forgive that. But as he sat in the detention cell, waiting for his court-martial, Jake felt something he had not felt in years of war. He felt proud of what he had done. He had saved lives today, and that was worth whatever punishment was coming. He did not know that his choice would soon change the course of the entire war.